Tesla just announced their big deal here recently to purchase at least $16 billion worth of chips.
A vehicle is literally probably, as a Internet of Things device, probably the most prolific data producer on the planet. Tesla took a risk and they get what this game is about. And this chip is the ultimate convergence chip for Tesla. The vehicle is effectively going to be able to use its vision stack to do more than just drive the car. It'll be able to do all sorts of recognition of objects, people, things, cities, and highways, and things that you don't think of right out the bat. This is the brain of autonomy in vehicles. This is the brain for autonomy in Optimus. And this will be the data center brain as well. The primary reason for doing AI6 is Optimus. Optimus will require the biggest brain of all.
Yeah, a combination of massive first principles thinking and massive cojones. All right, I have Phil with me today, and he is an exceptional person for us to talk about a very important topic. We're going to be diving into the world of accelerated computing. Tesla just announced their big deal here recently to purchase at least $16 billion worth of chips from the Samsung Taylor, Texas plant, and a very interesting partnership there that's evolving between Tesla and Samsung. Now, obviously, all of those chips are AI chips. AI chips are accelerated computing chips. And I mean, it's kind of a big deal. NVIDIA is now the largest company by market cap in the world, based solely on building some of the world's best AI accelerated computers. And so, yeah, that's what we're going to look into today. This is something that you know a little bit about. And so that's why I wanted to pick your brain and just let you run with your thoughts. What is the significance of this deal? How does it really impact, or how do accelerated computers impact Tesla's ambitions? And where does this deal play into what Tesla is evolving into over the next decade?
Yeah, it's a great question. Super excited about this deal, actually. I think it gives us great signal right now. I think what it's telling us is Tesla's kind of, I hate these terms, but going all in on AI, in particular, um, embodied autonomy, right? So we have robotaxi, we have Optimus, and it tells us that they understand where these businesses are headed. That the vehicle is largely now more of a platform for robotaxi than it is, um, discreetly as a auto type of play. Um, and so that's kind of the doorstep here. And what we can see is that Tesla took a risk and built their own AI chip early on, which was quite a risk in a way. There was lots of other potential options for them, but to do what they wanted to do on the car. And what's interesting about this is that if you kind of go back in the early days of FSD version 10, version 11, these were not end-to-end AI products, right? The AI was really focused on the perception side, that is identifying objects in the space, the dynamic and static objects. And but it was clear that Elon knew that inference compute, this accelerated computing, to compute these models was necessary to have on the edge, at the endpoint of the car. Um, and so he started this process of doing this early chip, and then I guess maybe it came into its own with hardware 4, which we have today in the vehicles, and then we're stepping into the next generation of that chip known as AI5. They've just changed nomenclature here. Hardware 4 is AI4. um, so they're promising a chip called AI5 that's about maybe 5 to 10x more compute than hardware 4. And then this deal tells us that they're going to do AI6, and that's another order of magnitude bigger. So we'll generationally go 2 orders of magnitude. And whether the chip is out in 27 or 28 or 29, it's telling us that they get what this game is about. And this chip is the ultimate convergence chip for Tesla. On one hand, they've had um, this kind of project that's sort of been in the hobby shop for a while called Dojo, which is coming into its own. I think it's at least taking up 10% of the load of training now for Tesla stuff. Maybe I might be wrong about the number, but it's something in that ballpark. Um, and that's it's its own discrete architecture based on this D1 and D2 chip. And then on the other side, you've got AI5, or AI4, AI5 series kind of chips. And what we're doing here with AI6 is we're doing convergence, and we're saying this is the brain of um, autonomy in vehicles. This is the brain for autonomy in Optimus, and this will be the data center brain as well, whether it's training or inference. Frankly, there's a lot of inference that goes on in the Tesla data center as well. By the way, so so to build this kind of this chip, it ultimately I think will be somewhat on the power scale of Blackwell, and I mean I don't know where NVIDIA will exactly be when this chip comes out, or um, but it's really the only company in the world to build what is largely a general purpose training and inference chip in the AI business, right? So um, we can start getting into the details of what this chip does versus you know the standard CPU kind of chips, but that's kind of I think the backdrop here.
Yeah. So I think the first quick follow up question is, do you feel like this AI 5 and AI 6 evolution are necessary for just the full self driving and robotaxi component of Tesla's evolving business? Or is that more for Optimus or future
Hmm.
things? I mean, it seems like we're close with hardware 4 now, and I
Yeah.
think it makes a lot of people nervous
Yep.
that if they're continuing to evolve the hardware, that our current cars are going to be obsoleted in
Yeah.
essence. And that's not a belief that I hold personally, but I was wondering if you could speak to that specific
Well, I mean, at some
concern.
level, our cars will be obsoleted. Technology's moving fast. Just hate to break it to you. So is my iPhone 15. Um, but you know, let's answer the question straight up to start with. I don't think that AI5 is required for um, unsupervised FSD. I think that they figured. In fact, I think they've signaled that the next version 14, what I'm calling version 14, I think most people are calling version 14, will be a 10x parameter increase over the current 13, and that it will in fact fit and run on hardware 4 um, compute platforms. So um, hardware 3, I think that kind of is kind of dead. Um, Sad to tell you, but I mean, maybe people think of their cars differently than they think their iPhones, but I kind of think of it, this is just the same kind of thing that's happening with iPhone, as we're just getting bigger, faster processors to take on more things. So you might ask, okay, why do an AI5 if you've got this hardware 4 that, solves quote autonomy in vehicles? And the answer is that there's no bright line here. There is like a extremely long tail of driving scenarios that will literally never end. And that what I think is happening with Tesla is that they have a set of KPIs that tell them where they want to be from a safety and performance point of view for FSD. And when they reach some threshold value on those KPIs, key performance indicators, that they say, okay, this is worthy of a build that is, fully unsupervised, whether it be customer vehicles, robotaxi. And I don't think that to me is mutually exclusive of whether it's on 4 or 5. But what's going to happen in 5 is that they're going to get more headroom on the vehicle, and we always have this term in software eats hardware. So whatever, and neural network is software, right? Um, that that'll consume that, but it'll give them more capability. They'll be able to bring larger models to bear. I mean, why is a bigger model better? Because I mean, it's not always better. It's not a direct correlation, but a bigger model it creates, there's more parameters in this model, which means there's more nuance to the decision framework. It's a bigger brain. It's like a human with a certain number of neurons versus a human with another larger set of neurons. So it it's going to be able to um, uh, an AI 5 kind of chip will be able to house a much larger model than what may be in 14. If 14's 10x, you can imagine that the next version 15 is now another 10x, and it's going to need a bigger compute. Now, what Tesla's doing on hardware 4 is, I think people forget that it's not like take the model, throw it on the car, and go. There is an extreme amount of what's called embedded engineering going on, where some of the best of Tesla's engineers aren't, AI research heads, but they're very good at uh, systems level embedded kind of stuff, and they're basically working extremely hard day and night, reducing photon to control latency. Okay, that's like the biggest thing is like how many cycles can you get from receiving data to making decisions and driving, and that affects safety. And you have these strings that are pulling against each other. The bigger the model, the more compute, which means that you can do less cycles, which theoretically could make it, it could be housed there, but it could be unsafe because it's not,
Fast enough.
yeah, it's not fast enough for driving decision. So what I think they're trying to do is they're trying to say, okay, like we need to have this run at the same photon to control latency that we have in the current version, and we want a bigger model. And there's things that they're doing with that model that they're probably beyond this discussion, like mix of experts architecture that allow them to sub-select parts of the model so that they're not executing this monolithic model at all times. Um, but but this is where we're going. We're going into, and when we get to AI 5 and then AI 6, what we're also going to see is that the use cases on the vehicle for vision are going to expand greatly. They're going to be able to, the vehicle is effectively going to be able to use its vision stack to do more than just drive the car. It'll be able to do all sorts of recognition of objects, people, things, cities, and highways, and things that you don't think of off right out the bat. But there's a lot of interesting use cases. Um, and I also think that what we get with something like AI 6, maybe AI 5, is that we get to do things like possibly host Grok natively on the vehicle and integrate it on a much more native. Because right now, if you people that have gotten the latest Tesla build, they're using this Grok beta, which is kind of cool. But all the inference is done in Memphis, right?
Yep.
Um,
Well,
so it's
actually, probably at Oracle or someplace like that.
yeah,
But
wherever the inference is
yeah,
done in the cloud. So what we're left with is, okay, could we do that on the vehicle and more tightly integrate it so that the vehicle is more like, sort of more like what Optimus will be, a talking, walking, driving, fully integrated brain. The part of the brain that talks to us will also be hosting the brain that drives the vehicle concurrently. So I think, the use cases will explode. And I think, this is what you do in the evolution of chips. You go and follow Moore's law because software people will demand more, be more cool stuff to do, lots more cool stuff.
well, so the way that I have been thinking about this is that, the FSD, while it is a very hard problem to solve, you're trying to solve driving pretty much everywhere
Mhm.
with one big model. It's still a specialized use case. Like it's a small subset of all of the types of things that humans do.
Right.
And Optimus is really supposed to be this general platform that's supposed to do, a much larger fraction of the overall things that humans do than just driving. And so I have been thinking about AI 5, AI 6, and I'm sure there will be, further evolutions of that computing platform is really being focused more on enabling those, that further expansion into the
Yeah.
Optimus project
Sure. Sure.
than FSD. I mean, do you? So it sounds like you agree. Like, is that a fair
Yeah. Yeah. I
characterization
mean,
of the need
yeah.
for that?
I mean, I think, and maybe it should have been said at the outset, I think the primary reason for doing AI 6 is Optimus. Like, I think, it is, Optimus will require the biggest brain of all compared to, you're right. So what the vehicle is, it's a bit of a specialized AI that has you might call it a single purpose. I mean, it's a very difficult problem to solve, but nonetheless, it is specialized. And until you start adding these other features, which I was just talking about, right? Ironically, and we drop right into this, you don't kind of materially generalize the whole thing. Um, but this is what the beauty of this thing is here we have a company that can build this single chip for convergence across its data centers, and it's in this case embedded AI projects. So yeah, that's exactly right. And I expect that they would have two to three to four, possibly an Optimus, probably two, and and the vehicle, of course, has two today. Probably will continue to have two.
So we've mentioned now that there's convergence between the AI 6 chip that's going to go in the computers in the cars and in the Optimus bots, and then the chips they're going to do training with in the cloud. Can you elaborate on what Elon has said that tells us that, and kind of what that means?
Yeah. So I mean, it's in a sense they're heading kind of directly at NVIDIA. I mean, it's a good way of thinking about it in simple terms. I mean, what NVIDIA has is their GPUs. I mean, it's a funny term that we were stuck on here, right? GPUs, talking about accelerated computing chips. But but there's a reason for that. Obviously, it started there. Um, yeah, but what I think we're seeing with Tesla is that they're directly heading at NVIDIA, not necessarily to compete with NVIDIA, but to build a generalized accelerated compute platform. And let's put it simply, it's very hard to do. I think the chips on the cars want to be high perform. They're inference chips. They don't train models. They run the models. They want to be high performance, low power, have good thermals. Want to generate a lot of heat. Um, Optimus is only so big. It's 150 pounds or something, and it's got, I don't know, a 20 kilowatt hour battery or something in it. And so to think the idea that it might need a cooling pack to keep it to keep its brain cool while it computes is a weird thought. A vehicle is a little bit more, it's a little bigger platform, but obviously it would like to use all its power to move you down the road. So now, if you go and you throw that in the data center, wow, it's a pretty specialized thing. Because I mean, look what Tesla's done with Dojo. So Dojo, in a way, you know, it's a chip that does a ton of math operations for the purpose of training, but they're using a system on wafer approach for that. So they're doing this 5 by 5 grid of chips with high speed interconnects. Um, and that's like they realized, what's interesting about accelerated computing, um, is that it's it's the problem. What accelerated computing does for us versus like a CPU versus GPU is it solves the problem. It shifts the problem to parallelism. Okay, that's really what its main gig is, and it works really well because when we're dealing with graphics, or we're doing Bitcoin mining, or we're doing particularly neural nets, we are doing a F ton, a lot of matrix multiply operations. And these are very simple math things. Um, they're just adds and multiplies, and they're really simple, but there are so many of them. And they can, the way you do, you can parallelize the operations. Now, having said that, the biggest problem all these chips face is data latency. Why do parallelism? It's because the chips are mostly spending all their time waiting on data. That's what they do. All day long, they wait on data to arrive out of memory. The data comes from DRAM, and it moves into the caches, and it eventually gets into the processor core. So what a parallel computing architecture does is says, hey, I can go off and I can overload myself in data. I can go compute while I'm waiting on data and get more done. When the problems themselves can be parallelized, and the problems that we're talking about here can be highly parallelized. So the architecture of Dojo, outside of it's just the fact that it's built these uniform, these cool chips, is it's optimized to reduce data latency across the entire fabric. Um, because remember, parallelism in these kind of data centers isn't just about what happens on the chip; it's what happens in the cluster. You don't just it's not just the chip itself. The chip itself has got many, many cores and it executes stuff in parallel, but that's not enough. I think I did some estimates in this paper that, the article I wrote on accelerated computing that said that GPT, uh, the model behind the original 3.0 chat
Yeah,
GPT was
3.5.
like, was something like, 1,200 quadrillion matrix multiplications to get the training data through the system. Um, and that's when the training data was small. Um, so you have these chips that do this stuff, but most of the time they're waiting on the data. And I think so. Dojo took a flyer here that said we're not going to just build a chip; we're going to build an entire architecture around the chip, changing it electrically and a bunch of other things so that we can reduce the data latency. So now Tesla's got a really interesting problem on its hands. It wants to build one chip to solve problems that are kind of different. I mean, they're the same and they're different, um, uh, but they live in different environments, right? The data center you can throw power at, and you can throw cooling at, and you can, look at how much cooling happens with these NVIDIA clusters, right? Um, but the car doesn't like that. The car doesn't want to use a lot of power. It doesn't want to provide a lot of cooling. It doesn't want to overheat. Um, so where they're headed to build this single chip fits all is an admirable goal, but extremely challenging.
Yeah, that number is just absolutely mind-boggling. I mean, we're talking about a number that makes trillions look tiny, and like, yeah, it's a lot of matrix math,
If
and
you
it is
do,
incredible.
it is incredible. If you do a simple, um, let's say, prompts are the inputs to these LLMs, right? You do a simple like 8-word query that's going to run inference, right? It's going to run a model without any context window. In other words, without any extra data, that's going to run like over 1 trillion matrix math operations, and that's all going to come back to you in um,
As one token.
a fifth of a second.
Yep.
I mean, that's mind blowing, right? And these matrices are big. I don't know if people are focused on it. They could read that article, but the matrix that they're multiplying here, these things are really big. They're simple number. Like the math is simple. The math is incredibly simple. It's just multiplies and adds, but there's so many of them. Um, and how convenient and interesting that what we think of as potentially the solution to artificial intelligence and possibly the AGI variant thereof is just simple math.
Yeah, very simple math at very large scales. And
Yeah, probably
yeah.
different than the human brain does it, but nonetheless, it comes back to that idea that well quoted paper, the bitter lesson. The idea
By
that
Rich Sutton.
yeah, the cool idea there, and maybe depressing idea for some, is that you can just throw compute at the problem, and you're out of the game. Don't spend your time trying to build clever ways to solve problems. Just throw compute at it.
And
So
lots
if
of
you want
data.
to, and lots of data. Um, but if you want to solve a chess problem, just you know go deep. And how do you go deep? You compute all the biggest tree that you can, and a human can't do that, and so you can outpace a human. And I think that's where all of AI has sort of gone there now. Um, and so, and we don't see a relief valve to that. In other words, we don't see some optimization that gets us off that train. There may be one, I mean, I'm certainly not here to say there is, but that was the whole fear about DeepSeek, right? Not that it was going to change it up, uh, but it was this idea that, oh my God, we might be able to use a lot less compute to get to the same answer. But what we see now, and what we see, there's no mistake if the brain of Elon Musk says that I need to build um, a data center in Memphis that's two, 300,000 GPUs going to a million, scaling to 50 million equivalent A100s. That is the NVIDIA kind of like, we'll call it the base, performance thing here. Clearly, he understands that the bitter lesson is the way to go for the foreseeable future. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean Colossus, that was my direct takeaway from his plans with Colossus is that he is all in on the bitter lesson, and so he's acquiring the largest coherent compute clusters known to man and continuing to push the frontier forward on how big that is. And then he also has access to a lot of very unique data. I mean, I think that what he's doing, especially the marriage of Tesla and XAI and their ability to first start out with video data from
Mhm.
car, but eventually video data from Optimus, that they'll have access
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
differentiated, specialized data at a scale that no one else can even begin to touch.
it's funny. If I go back almost a year, I wrote an article. It's posted on X. I think it's called Optimus. I know what I can see, and Elon reposted that article, and a lot of people thought it was like completely wacky, and I realized why he reposted it, um, because that's what he understands what I was saying, and what I was getting at was that um, real world data collected by Optimus with its eyes, or frankly, our vehicles running around anywhere, is powerful data, and it will be the kind of data that we can compute on and and learn on, and that we've sort of run out of data when it comes to written data. I mean, written data is derived data, right? It means that you and I as humans have experienced something in the real world. Once we've experienced it and built up some knowledge of it, we write about it to teach other humans something. Okay, so it's not original. Something written down is not original, organic
Unless
data,
it's a pure hallucination.
unless it's a pure hallucination. But so it's a derived, it's a compressed work. It's compression. So how do you get the uncompressed data? Um, just let just let your optimist see it. And you might think that's crazy, but I use some examples. I can't remember the examples I had, but one of them stupid ones. But I mean, it just sort of paints the story. As I said, imagine that you were a biology research student and you were doing this thing about leaf growth on trees, and in some uh, biome or area you were trying to like figure out how quick the bloom is on trees of the pear trees versus the oak trees or something, and you decided that your project was going to be to count leaf growth, like from spring, like winter to spring, and when the bud breaks and you get some leaf growth, and you're like, okay, I want to count the leaves on this tree, and then I want to count the leaves on that tree, and I want to do it every day as it grows, and I can see like what the ramp is. And complete this completely contrived example here, but now imagine if you told Optimus, go out in the backyard, go out in this area and go count these leaves, and then tomorrow go do it again, and then go do it again, and then go do it again. No human or team of humans could pull that off with anything but estimates. And so here we are, in the world that we live in with all these empirical stuff. We come up with answers to things based on very little limited data. And one of the reasons is we're not very good at like counting things or observing things, so we don't have the capacity to do that. Whereas something like Optimus could literally walk the neighborhood and do that on Monday, and then start over and do it on Tuesday. And and if there's not enough, you just get three of them. And so that's what's interesting about that, is that you have like kind of real world data, really real world data, not derived data, that can go through any of these compute clusters and all of a sudden build us a knowledge of raw physics, you know, how how the real world works, how the biology works, how any of these things. And so you're going to see, I think you just pointed out, there's this funny convergence of, I mean, like, it's not, it's not weird for people to think that Tesla should invest in XAI because they're going to slam into each other. You know, Tesla's going to want XAI's work, and XAI is going to want Tesla's chips.
And
Um,
their yeah, and their video data definitely.
and
I mean,
yeah,
I
and
think
the
that
video data.
Elon even said at one point, and it was probably after he reposted your thing, that the only form of data that scales infinitely is video data. And
Mhm.
especially, when you think about it, it really is legitimately infinite based on the size of our universe. Like if you can get zoom in far enough, you can get data about, how atoms and things work through video. And then if you zoom out, like, yeah, also things far away like space and our universe, our galaxy, all of those things, like there's video data that's available.
Just history alone. I mean, let me give an example. Imagine that you thought, okay, I'm going to go to Coachella this year. I'm going to go hang out and um and so you're saying, okay, what a year later, what did that Coachella look like? Who was on stage? You could go back through the web and you can see, but you don't have a record of every artist performing. You don't have direct access. You don't have the left view of the stage, the right view of the stage. You don't know what that artist did. You don't know that artist picked their nose at this minute and second into the, like. There's so much data that we don't know about, just sort of simple history, right? And then what happens is that data gets the what happens from that data is it gets, let's call it, compressed, but it also becomes so lossy that we end up literally not knowing what the takeaway is from some of these, what's called an event or a football game. I mean, you see stats out of a football game. What is that? Well, you could just reproduce those stats easily by just having enough cameras around the game, right? I mean, how could you miss? So imagine that you just had enough cameras around that game, and you had the kinds of stats would explode. Like, crazy things like, how many times the quarterback bent his pinky finger. I mean, maybe some stupid stuff, but you might, with AIs, you might build discovery out of that. You might find out why that quarterback is better than this quarterback. That right now we've guessed our way through a lot of these things, and we can just use large data sets and have the ability to finally process them in a meaningful way, where we're now just able to ask questions of the data, right? Ask questions of the data, as opposed to, when I was readers might not know, but I was at early days, I was at Rivian, and I founded the cloud team, which is all about vehicle data. And a vehicle is literally, probably, as a Internet of Things device, probably the most prolific data producer on the planet. I mean, there are other things that could be arranged to, be a prolific data producer. But a natural vehicle with like a Tesla or Rivian, with cameras and sensors and just the GPUs just doing their thing, are producing tons, enormous amount of data, right? And the goal of the cloud team was to take every byte from the vehicle as it's produced every, millisecond or whatever, and shift it off into the cloud. And the and not every, because it's too much, but the debate that I had with many that didn't get it was, this data is going to be valuable, but yeah, but it's not yet valuable. So what do we do with it? And just things like storage cost alone are enormous for something like that, right? But at the time, circa 2017, 18, when we first started this, I would have to, like, literally on the way to work, think of examples so I could produce examples of, but if we had this data, we could do this, because imaginations were sort of limited, and this is a um, pretty progressive company in terms of its technological understanding of the universe, but at least the vehicle space. Um, but you'd have to invent these ideas, and then people would say, "Well, how would you accomplish that?" And I always thought, I really don't know. Like, I don't know how to organize all this data in a way where I could just derive meaning or be introspective about asking it simple questions. So now,
But
speaking,
it
yeah,
is a logical conclusion just based on Moore's law alone, but obviously, accelerated computing has been growing at a rate that is far faster than Moore's law now since Nvidia really
that's
started
correct. Yeah,
focusing on this area. That you're going to have like having the ability to do that type of processing, even though you don't know exactly how it's going to look or when it's going to come into existence. The raw computing capacity to do those things is inevitable and not that far away.
yeah, yeah. No, I mean that was the idea that I'd have to kind of hit the escape button on. It's like, well, it's coming. So in other words, if we lost data, it was gone forever. So we wanted to store it, but if we stored too much of it, our data center costs would be pretty high. And but it's like, how do you organize this data in ways that are meaningfully you could extract information? Now, I mean, just think about I've written on this topic too with Tesla. The fleet is enormous. The driving fleet is enormous, and um, and getting bigger. And with cybercab, robotaxi at large will be massive, right, in terms of number of vehicles being able to visually gather information from our highways. And the cool thing is, I mean, we will never need if you really graph that together in a meaningful way, we'll never need any kind of traffic systems again, because there's enough coverage that you can infer all the meaning of why we know today, like we drive down the road and we see like this big red block and we're like, oh, the road is slowing down. Well, we don't know why. So every one of us that drives knows this very fundamental thing. We see the road slow down, we see the red line on the Waze or Apple Maps or inside the Tesla, and we say, oh shit, the road's slowing down. I guess it could be stopped for 3 hours. Like, might be stopped for 10 minutes. So do you make that fundamental decision to get off the highway and start doing something else? But what if you had great look ahead? What if you had look ahead? What if you had vehicles right at the apex of the slowdown and it said, oh, you know what? There's 5 emergency vehicles, you know, um, blocking the road, but you can't see up a mile and you don't know what news station to turn on to get that answer. So you just have this enormous potential for real-time data beyond data that you just accumulate for training purposes. And then, as we know, what we've learned from data is that, I mean, what is AI in a sense right now? All AI is, simply stated, is taking past data and using it for predictive reasons, right? I mean, that's what full self-driving in a way is, just using past human driving decisions in a way that allows us to predict what we should, like, oh, this is what we're seeing situationally, and this is what we should do about it, right? Um, but that's just a piece of it. Imagine that you could use that compute, and what you might find is that the reason AI 6 is so powerful in the car is that a lot of training becomes edge training as well. Like, you start processing the data locally to build it into a materially compressed state, tokenized state, so that you can send it off in a way that's not as large to the cloud, and so the cloud doesn't have to do the heavy lift. Because, I mean, realistically, with something like AI 6, you have essentially the world's largest distributed compute infrastructure. So there's that.
Especially if you're talking about, millions of Optimus robots at that point in time.
Yeah,
And
yeah. I mean, even these vehicles would have enough headroom while they're driving. It's the robotaxi's driving you down the road. You put an AI 6 chip in a robotaxi. It's driving down the road. You're interacting with it through a natural grok that might be local and deeply integrated to the car. And in the meantime, it's training on the data through its vision stack to do completely other separate. It's counting the leaves on trees, to go back to my stupid example. Um, and it's doing that um, as kind of like a uh, you know distributed training process, or it's just receiving training load from the data center somewhere else because at some point you can only build so many large data centers, right?
Yeah. And like one of the things that I was speaking about earlier today with Jordan Giesecke and Farzad was that if we're building this AI 6 chip that is the same fundamental chip that's going into a large form factor super chip in the data center, that there's nothing stopping you from also doing something that's in between that, I think, what did he say was going to be 512 or
Yeah,
something
that
roughly?
particular piece of the transcript is a little hard to make
Understand.
sense of. I mean, uh, whatever he was saying, I mean, clearly the data center is all about multiplying those units, and
Yeah.
like the current Dojo is the system on wafer 5 by 5 configuration of chips with fast interconnects, literally etched,
Mhm.
right? So we're not cutting these things and cutting these things out of the
Mhm.
wafer and testing their yield. We need 100% yield off the entire wafer itself, and assuming that they build an architecture that continues that, yeah, then you can stack those things right in a
Mhm.
single housed unit. And if you can stack them in a single housed unit, um, and provide the right power infrastructure, I think part of his um, game here was to change the way the baseline rail power goes to these things so that you would get better energy utilization versus the standard plug-in stuff. Um, so if you could do that, then yeah, you could think of it as compute blocks that um, could be could be fairly transportable. And I mean, who knows? I mean, a car.
Composable. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. So there'd be points where your vehicle itself could possibly house something that's much larger than two
Mhm.
AI 6 chips, um, and run around and gather energy in a distributed fashion and compute. So
Yeah, that was, I guess there's two forks that I want to pursue at the same time. I'll stick with the one where, if maybe there's a version of that, if we're looking at something like 500 chips for the data center and then 2 chips for the car, that maybe you have in between board that's 20 chips or whatever that is attached to your every mega pack, and anywhere that you have energy infrastructure
you have
as
compute.
well,
Yeah.
along with Starlink, and then
Yeah.
you can also distribute more of that distributed compute fabric across even more other
Right.
things that Tesla makes, as in addition to the Optimus robots
Oh
and
yeah.
the
That makes that
Cybercabs.
makes complete sense. I mean, I think if Elon's eye is on this, he's thinking, okay, look, I don't like the fact that NVIDIA controls a key component here. That ultimately I want to vertically integrate this whole thing. I did it with batteries. I'm going to do it with silicon, and he's probably thinking, you know, 10 times faster than both of us. That maybe 100 times. um, that look what NVIDIA's got that they're not really utilizing. They're not. I mean, they're smart guys, but I mean, he's a smart dude, and he's thinking, okay, they hold these key chips. I'm beholden to buy them at this point. It doesn't mind, but he can see what they're good for and what they're not. I mean, he's so damn experienced in building out that large compute. I mean, what is the largest? I mean, I think Colossus is the largest AI compute cluster there is. There may be some others, but I'm not sure they're 100% AI compute data centers. Um,
Yeah, not
and
not that
so,
are coherent, I don't think. I mean,
yeah,
I think there are clusters that are larger, but they're not,
but
one
yeah, they're not
single
one.
brain.
And one single brain, let's be honest, that is extremely hard to do. That's not plug in. NVIDIA doesn't give you, I mean, whether they give you a rack of them or not, they don't tell you how to build them up in these large clusters, and you learn through extreme experience, like the the training on these things are these crazy epics, right? Where they pull power at like 100%, and then they go down. They pull and they go down. And of course, what did they do in Memphis? They backed them with these mega packs because they could get the power to be evened out and not, um, you know, um,
At the like millisecond level.
yeah, because these acting coherently as a cluster, they the whole point is to distribute the compute. So that means that what they're hoping to do is through one training epoch, spend the least amount of time, right? Or they're taking a data set, they want to run it through. The whole point is not to let it run for a couple minutes. It's like you want to get it down to the smallest unit of time, and then that by doing that, now you created weird, unusual demands on your power infrastructure. That so the better your cluster is, the more effed up your power infrastructure is, and can't feed it without architecturally changing it. So this comes back to where we started here on this, which is Elon probably is looking at NVIDIA saying to himself, I know how to do these big brains and the components of these brains in a way that can be applied to a multitude of things. And he may be like traveling that brain pattern down, like what he's doing with XAI, and he's doing it with Tesla. And I think what we said earlier is these two are going to slam head in on into each other.
Yeah, and Jensen has to think about, how does he make their NVIDIA architecture be this general purpose platform
Right.
that anyone
Yeah.
can come and build on. And Elon is thinking about, how do I make real world AI real as quickly as humanly possible? And yeah, I think that's one of the moonshots for the AI 6 architecture,
Yeah.
really being the first installment of just like a dedicated AI accelerated compute
Yeah.
architecture that brings
Well,
that future forward even faster than NVIDIA could make it happen.
yeah. Another way to say that, I think you're right. You're right over the target here, because another way to say that is that if you're Elon and you've figured out how to build this extremely coherent cluster and you know what you're doing, you're probably his top, NVIDIA's top customer for understanding. You fan this out to hundreds of other, thousands of other organizations that are buying these chips and using them horizontal applications. Their organizations are not smart enough to know how to use these things in ways. So what do you have to do? You end up dumbing down the design. I don't mean literally the chips are amazingly designed. That's not what my point is. It's just sort of like if you add software frameworks on top of it, like CUDA, what you end up with is this sort of like one size fits all stack for people who can't strip it out and do it, can't get down to the real first principles of building the thing.
CUDA is going
So,
to be the SAP of
right,
AI
yeah,
architecture.
that's an easier way of saying what I'm getting at. Yeah, it's that you end up with this sort of one size fits all thing that um, solves nobody's problem perfectly, but solves everybody's problem aggregately, sort of. And that's what your business is. I mean, that's what their business is now. Where Tesla, when they build this chip, can decide specifically how it gets pushed. I mean, that's the beauty of this vertical integration, right? They can decide exactly how it gets pushed into its use cases. And you just can't do that if you're just selling chips. But
Yes.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
um,
I mean, it is such a deep field. And obviously, we didn't even begin to touch on, what are the implications of intelligence being brought to bear in the real world
yeah.
in an exponentially increasing framework of technology. Um,
I mean,
yeah, that's kind of
if you
mind
to
bending.
some to summarize this, there's like two parts of this conversation, right? There's the near term advantages Tesla gets, and its actual businesses that we understand and know, and we need compute for FSD, Optimus, and data center, right? And then there's the other part of the discussion is, how do you make this, um, how do you make this stuff bigger and more applicable to a multitude of problems that have not yet, uh, been brought to bear for solution. So to your point earlier, we talked about FSD being kind of albeit very hard, extremely hard, um, a kind of limited AI, and it is. But then we expanded that conversation and we said, well, but if the car has 8 eyes, what else can it see, and what else would that do for us? And where would we compute those things? And that's sort of where you start to go with this thing. Um, so I think we can put our heads in the clouds and dream of some crazy opportunities in the future, and that's cool because that Tesla will have Elon has already thought of those things mostly, and we can also just put our feet on the ground and go, well, this is how it's going to be used in the next version of this. This is how it's. God bless you. This is how it's going to be used in Optimus. So it's going to be used in training, and we can see the direct economic and just competitive advantages for Tesla, the company. So let's wrap it up.
Yeah, we can. I want to, but now I have this burning question that
Go for it. Go for it.
you may or may not have a perspective on this, but if let's say in 2030 that AI 6 and Dojo 3 are in production at scale and we're applying them to real world problems, where does that put the United States relative to China in this AI race?
Yeah, I really don't know. I mean, I think, I don't think China has not shown itself to be as impressive to me um as others sort of take it. I think, they're the ultimate copy and paste um engineering talent, maybe beyond that, just from a, and that's sort of good enough, but copy and paste always means it trails. It means it's behind. So in this world where we're going super, super fast, if all they are is copy paste, then they'll be behind us materially on a continuous basis, as well as on an instant basis where it might matter. I think the weird thing about this, and my thought about this, is that China is doing this more as a sort of a national entity, and we're doing it as a broken up into companies in a capitalistic society. Um, I prefer it that way, honestly. Like, in other words, I'm certainly not impressed by our current administration's idea of, investing in AI and making us super competitive. And it's like, I think Elon's kind of walked away from that himself and said, yeah, no, it's not going to work that way. I'm going to go do it myself. Um, and so I think in a weird way, um, Elon will probably, with Tesla, with XAI, uh, I think he's signaled largely that he's going all in. And I think that tells us that, he'll lead the pack on this for foreseeable future. And I don't think that, and I could be wrong. This is like a maybe American arrogance, so I should be a little bit careful. But I think that I just don't see China in the fundamental breakthrough business. I see them doing amazing copy work. And that's important. Don't get me wrong. It's like if you think
And
about it,
even refinement, like that was the
yeah,
impressive thing about the DeepSeek R1 model was that,
yeah.
there was nothing that was a fundamental breakthrough theoretically, but the engineering implementation of that was far superior
Well,
to
the,
anything that we had. But,
that's
based on their limited constraints that they had to work with, that they had to solve those problems.
Well, it's also, yes, right. I mean, sometimes constraints are the way you solve a problem. Um, Abundance is not the way to do it. That's why you go back to say software eats hardware. It's like if you give a software engineer a lot of hardware, um, they'll just use it, and the software they put on it is shit, right? Um, you know, uh, you want to know a great team, put them on a resource limited compute platform and see magic come off that. That's a great software team. But yeah, I mean, it's a funny thing because manufacturing excellence is actually the key to also scaling certain things. So if you think about China versus the U.S. and maybe we just kind of bring that down to humanoid bots and that kind of future that we'll have. you know, okay, maybe Optimus is a super bot. It's the best bot or whatever the heck, but another Google worth of those coming out of China, maybe they don't end up on our shores for you know restrictive reasons, but there's certainly an army of them, and and so China I think can build the hell out of things at you know you know two nines. Maybe Tesla does it at three nines, but it may be immaterial if you can build the hell out of things, and so that's where I think there are advantages in the sense,
Yeah,
in maybe this and maybe
quantity
this
is a quality all its own.
yeah, it's a scale thing, and that's why you kind of want to arrange you know nationality against nationality, but I see it not never working here. It's just
Hmm.
we don't we don't value, or maybe rightfully so. I mean, this goes back to just kind of philosophy of it, but we don't let the government go and take on big projects. It usually fails. I mean, other than Apollo and
Huh.
you know the bomb, I'm not
Yep.
sure we've done so many big projects in this country that have been successful. Railroads weren't done by governments that I know of, and they kind of changed the way the country worked at the turn of the century. So,
Yeah, and it seems like, based on the way our space industry is evolving, that
oh yeah,
the version of the intercontinental railway for space is going to be done by
yeah,
private companies as well.
yeah, yeah,
No
yeah.
NASA there,
Yeah, I mean we've gotten out of that moonshot business. I mean, to use it, um, and
literally.
yeah,
Yep.
use it literally. And again, I don't necessarily think it's the wrong approach as long as we free up enterprise, private
Hmm.
enterprises to um, build the hell out of things at the best
Yep.
tax advantage and so forth, and we take the constraints off of private enterprise to do what they want to do. Then I think that's the best way. Well, this is just an opinion thing here, but best way for our country to succeed is to take any constraints off of private enterprise and let it run free. Um, and usually I mean, that's how we've been bred, if you know what I mean. Like, in other words,
Yep.
that's kind of our cultural model or our economic model. And so, I mean, like, let Tesla go wild, let SpaceX go wild, let XAI go wild, within some framework of you
Yep.
got to have some guardrails.
Yeah, we
But
need to maintain competition, but
yeah,
yeah, we also need to let them go out there and really give it their best shot. Yeah, I like, one area where I'm excited to see this is I'm a lot more optimistic about the combination of Amazon and Microsoft and Meta and Oracle and all these other big hyperscalers solving, our energy scaling issues that
mhm,
Elon keeps pointing to, how China is adding multiples of US energy
yeah,
production capacity.
yeah,
Like, that's scary if we just leave that problem in the hands
yeah,
of our government and our regulated monopoly, current energy providers. But none of those companies that we just talked about are sitting back on their hands and just being like, oh, the power company said they can only give me, 100 megawatts next year.
yeah,
I guess my, ambitions for my company have to
yeah.
now
Full stop, right?
collapse tenfold. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that goes back to your point about sometimes constraints create breakthroughs, and in a sense, even at big scales like these hyperscaler companies like a Microsoft or a Meta, they are constrained by not having something the size of the so-called China grid feeding them, and so now they're forced to innovate, and with two elements of that cause innovation typically, um, constraints to a problem as well as competitors. So Meta wants to win versus Google versus whoever, and therefore the first one to achieve limitless power and limitless compute, at least in our bitter lesson version of this game, kind of
Which
wins.
Elon is driving. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why he's got to be Jensen's, most favorite customers,
Yeah,
is because Elon then pushes, hey, Satya, if you want to keep up, you gotta.
Yeah.
up the ante.
Yeah.
Zuck, if you want to keep up, you got to up the ante,
Yeah. Yeah.
and just go
Yeah.
on
He does
down the
it.
line.
He does it by words and actions, right? I mean, it's actually both things. So it's not like he's just spewing a bunch of intelligent words about how he knows what the right thing is. It's also that he's gone off and done Colossus and Meta's flying drones over it, going, "How the hell did you get this done?" Um, and and oh, by the way, how big is it? And I need to build something bigger, and or I'm out of the game. So
All the people I hired told me that it wasn't possible to build something that large, and I just
yeah,
believed them.
yeah. I mean, that's it's actually if you wrote a book, a couple of years from now, and that of top 10 engineering marvels, we got like things from the past like Hoover Dam, and I mean, you gotta have to put some of Elon's stuff on there, and particularly stuff out of SpaceX, but definitely, I mean, you may
Especially in the
consider,
time frame that they put Colossus one
yeah,
together.
that's the key, right? I mean, it's like they compress that, and there's only so much compression you can do on time, especially when you're doing something that's physical. Like I think of you know, s- software, you get a little bit more liberty on it, but like if you're just doing something that, like if you have, I mean, look, a friend of mine uh, has a friend who was subcontracted to um, add cooling pipes inside Colossus data center, and they were under this extreme pressure, and they ran these cooling pipes like down the hallways of the data center, completely like non-OSHA compliant. Okay, because there's these pipes that have diameter of like 3 feet, and there's a story that he tells, and I can't verify it's true, but he said that Elon and some of his data center buddies literally made a late night run to Home Depot and bought up a bunch of ladders so that they could drape them over these pipes, so they had a way to jump from one side of the data center to the other. And they took that shortcut, and what I heard was, again, more hearsay, I guess, but that OSHA came in and said, you can't do this. And of course, he couldn't have buried him at the time. He just didn't have the time. And I think he said, something to the effect of like, whatever the fine is, just keep sending me the bill until like I'll just keep paying the fines on that. So I mean, you can complain that that's a terrible shortcut, and oh boy, that just ruined the universe of, yeah, that's kind of garbage. It's like he knew he looked at these fundamental problems, and said, well, I don't need to put the pipe underground if I don't have to, and maybe that's not exactly a perfectly true story, but there's probably 10 others like that. That there's no way you could do that kind of build at that scale in that time frame without thinking the problem differently. No way. Impossible. Yeah.
Yeah, a combination of massive first principles thinking and massive cojones.
Yeah. 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 That's a good way of saying it. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, this has been an excellent conversation, Phil. Thank you for joining
You're
us
welcome.
today and helping us to understand these questions at the next level deeper. Where can people find you online?
I'm pretty much only on X at P Beisel, so that's Beisel. That's it.
All right. And yeah, you write excellent articles on a whole host of topics.
Thank
Obviously, I think
you.
we've referenced several here today. I highly recommend for people, the one that we talked about the most was an article titled Accelerated Computing. But then he's got a lot of articles on Tesla's FSD, some stuff on Dojo, just a whole host of really
Yeah,
incredible stuff. So, and then, yeah,
really
you've
fun.
got an excellent background. I don't think we got into this early in the episode enough, but history at Apple, doing a host of things, but cloud computing being one of them, and then also your history at Rivian, which we touched on a little bit today.
Yeah.
So you really have the technical and engineering background to understand these things and then to be able to communicate them very well. So really appreciate you hanging out with us today.
Yeah, it was awesome. Thank you.
All right. Have a great day.